My species reads fear through air pressure, 60 distinct signatures all pressing inward at once, the way a storm builds when it has nowhere to go. I have been a cadet at the Meridian Academy for 3 weeks and I have never felt a room produce readings like that one. The footage on the screen was designed to show us the cost of this life, and it was working on 59 of us, without exception. The human in the back row was eating dots not furtively, not nervously, with the specific, unhurried attention of someone processing information they found relevant but not destabilizing. He folded his wrapper afterward into a small, neat square. I spent 3 days trying to find the right question to ask him. I spent 6 months realizing I had been asking the wrong one. The room was designed to break people, not cruelly, not maliciously, but with the cold, surgical precision of an institution that had learned, over 200 years of producing officers, that it was better to know what a cadet was made of before putting them in command of something that mattered. The Meridian Combined Forces Academy sat on a station at the junction of 4 Alliance territories, a deliberate choice, symbolic in the way that only institutions old enough to have traditions can be symbolic. 60 new cadets from 11 species had been assigned to Cohort 7. They had been told, during orientation, that this day would be different from the others. They had not been told how different. My name is Sorrel Van. I am a Thesia species that navigates by atmospheric pressure gradients, that feels the shape of a room through the weight of the air itself. I can detect the collective stress of 60 beings from the moment the doors seal behind us. I felt it that morning like a weather system pressing down on my shoulders before the lights even cut out. When they did cut out, the room went from tense to something older, something animal. And then the screen came on. What followed was not training footage. It was not simulation data. It was the recorded truth of what this life could look like, what it had looked like. For the officers who had walked these halls before us, ships torn open, voices ending mid-sentence, the specific, intimate horror of people who had trained for everything and still found something they had not been ready for. It was designed to show us the cost, to see who would carry it and who would need to be quietly, kindly redirected towards something else. I sat through 47 minutes of it with my precious sense screaming, and somewhere in the middle of all that screaming, I noticed the human. I almost missed it. The room around me was producing the kind of collective fear response that my species reads like weather, 60 distinct signatures of elevated stress, all of them pressing inward and upward like a storm that had nowhere to go. My own reading would have been in there too if I had been paying attention to myself. I wasn't. I was watching him. He was the only human in our cohort. He had been introduced during orientation as Cadet James Oro from a continent called North America, a piece of geographic information that meant nothing to me but that he had mentioned with the particular emphasis of someone for whom it meant something specific. He sat near the back in a seat sized for a body larger than his. He had been quiet during the first weeks, not shy, not distant, simply economical with words, in a way I had initially read as discomfort and later revised to precision. During the footage, while the room produced the most intense collective fear signature I had ever registered in an enclosed space, Cadet James Oro was eating a ration bar. Not furtively, not with any apparent awareness that this was unusual. He had unwrapped it with the mild distraction of a person opening something that is being slightly difficult, taken a methodical bite, and was watching the screen with the focused, neutral attention of someone processing information they found relevant but not destabilizing. When the lights came back up and the room began the slow work of recovering, he folded the wrapper into a small, neat square. He noticed me watching. He gave a small nod, the kind you give a stranger in a corridor. I did not nod back. My pressure sense was doing something it had never done before, generating conflicting readings from the same source calm surface, something else underneath, something it did not have a clean category for. I spent 3 days trying to find the right question. I went to the Academy's accessible information on Earth before I found the nerve to sit across from him. The file was not classified. It was simply not something most cadets thought to read. Humans were new. Their file was short. The section I kept returning to was a paragraph under recorded conflict history that the archivist had apparently not known what to do with, because the language in it was different from the careful, measured prose of the rest of the document. It said, Earth's recorded military history spans approximately 5,000 standard years. Conflicts are documented with a frequency and scale that has no direct parallel in any other current Alliance member species. Humans entered the Alliance period without any sustained era of pre-conflict peace in their recorded history. I read that sentence 4 times, then I read the paragraph that followed, which attempted to contextualize it. It should be noted that human media and cultural transmission routinely incorporates documentation of historical conflict, including footage, accounts, and artistic reconstruction, across all age demographics. Exposure to recorded violence appears to be considered a normal component of cultural education rather than a specialized professional preparation. I sat with that for a while. Then I understood something I had not understood before. The footage we had been shown in that room had been selected, curated, and delivered at maximum psychological impact to an audience of adults encountering it in a controlled environment designed for that exact purpose. For James Oro it had been Tuesday. I sat down across from him in the mess hall without asking. I learned later this was slightly rude by human standards. He did not seem to mind. "You were watching me," he said, not looking up from his tray. "I was," I said. There was no point pretending otherwise. Everyone stares eventually. He turned something over on his tray with a utensil. "It's fine. What do you want to know?" "During the screening," I said, "you were eating." "Yeah, I want to understand that." He looked up then, and what I registered from him was not the clean calm of his surface. It was something more layered. The way certain atmospheric systems appear stable from above, while generating enormous pressure at their base. "Did you understand what we were watching?" I asked. "I understood it fine." "Then how were you not?" I stopped. I did not have the right word. The Athesi language has 17 distinct terms for fear by gradation, and none of them described what I had expected from him and not received. "Not broken," he offered. His tone carried no edge in it. I was going to say affected. I was affected. He set his utensil down. "That's not the same as it being new." I asked him what he meant. He told me, in the careful, economical way he approached everything, about a world where the documentation of violence was woven into the ordinary fabric of growing up, not as exceptional events as weather, as the continuous background noise of a species that had been in conflict with itself for the entirety of its recorded existence and had, somewhere along the way, stopped treating that fact as something that required special psychological preparation to acknowledge. "That sounds," I said, before I could stop myself, "like a very difficult way to be raised." "It is," he agreed simply. "Doesn't mean it isn't true." 6 weeks later, we were aboard a decommissioned training vessel called the Calder's Hope when something went wrong that was not part of any exercise. A real failure in aging equipment, a cascade of real consequences. Smoke in a real corridor in a real section of ceiling that came down and blocked our exit, and real fear, not simulated, not curated, not delivered at a safe remove by an institution that controlled the variables pressing into the air of that corridor like something alive. I had 4 cadets with me, Pelish the Karathi, whose aggression response had snapped into her body the moment the alarms changed pitch. A younger Vethali male who had gone into the rapid shallow breathing of someone whose body had made an early decision about survival options. 2 others, frozen in the particular stillness of beings whose training had not yet reached the part of them where training mattered, and then James appeared from the direction of the smoke. He moved through it the way water moves, steady, purposeful, reading something in the environment around him that the rest of us were too overwhelmed to read. "Everyone's still okay," he said. The way someone says it when they already know the answer and are asking to give the others something to respond to. "The path is blocked both ways," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. His presence had done something to the pressure in the corridor, not eliminated the fear. I could still feel it in every signature around me, including my own, but organized it somehow, given it a direction to move. "There's a maintenance shaft," he said, 15 meters back through the smoke. "It goes up." "How do you know that?" Palosh demanded, her voice carrying the edge her species could not suppress when frightened. "I memorized the ship's schematics before we boarded." He said it without emphasis. A simple fact. Figured it was worth knowing more than one way out of anywhere I was sleeping for a week. We followed him without discussion, because there was nothing to discuss. He led us to a hatch set low in the corridor wall, invisible unless you knew its exact location, and we climbed one by one, in the dark, through air that tasted of metal and emergency until we reached a maintenance room with breathable air and proper lighting. When I reached the top and turned back, I saw him pause at the bottom of the shaft before climbing in himself. He was looking back down the corridor the way it had come. "What are you checking?" I called down. He climbed up and sealed the hatch. He was afraid. He told me so. Later, when we were sitting in the maintenance room waiting for confirmation that the situation had been contained, he said it plainly, without performance, looking at his hands. "Yeah, pretty scared, actually." I told him he hadn't looked it. He said looking scared didn't make anyone climb a ladder faster. I thought about the wrapper folded into a neat square while the room fell apart around him. I had spent weeks trying to decode that image, what kind of absence it represented. The wrapper was not the absence of fear. It was fear that had learned, through a history none of us had been required to survive, exactly how to keep its hands busy while the rest of the mind remained operational. It was the small, mundane anchor of a person who had grown up in a world where the footage we had been shown was Tuesday, and who had therefore spent his entire life developing the specific and costly skill of carrying terrible things without setting them down in the middle of situations where setting them down would get someone killed. The Academy revised its training curriculum shortly afterward, a formal acknowledgement that there were tactical and psychological frameworks within human history that had not yet been incorporated into Alliance military education. The announcement caused debate. Some cadets welcomed it. Others expressed concerns about what it meant to bring that kind of knowledge into classrooms designed for species that had come to the Alliance from calmer histories. I understood both positions. I also understood, by then, what I had not understood that first morning in the screening room. The calm I had witnessed was not a gap. It was not a failure to register. It was not cultural distance or translation error or some convenient deficiency in emotional architecture. It was the most expensive thing humanity had ever built, purchased across 5,000 years of recorded conflict, paid for in a currency no other alliance species had been asked to spend at the same scale, passed down through generations the way other things get passed down in the specific, unreadable knowledge that moves between people who have survived something together and want to make sure the next generation survives it too. James Oro carried it the way his grandfather had carried it, the way his grandfather's grandfather had carried it, quietly, practically, without asking to be recognized for it, because recognition had never been the point. The point was that when a ceiling came down and the smoke came in, and 60 days of training threatened to dissolve into paralysis, someone already knew where the hatch was. Someone had already thought about what happened next. That night, after the ceremony that marked the end of our training cycle, I found him standing alone near a window overlooking the academy grounds. "Will you tell me more?" I asked. "About where it comes from, your grandfather, all the things you haven't shared yet." He was quiet for a long time. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think you've earned the longer version now." We stood there together as the lights of the academy settled into evening, and for the first time, I understood that what I had mistaken for emptiness in that screening room had always been the opposite. It was someone already full of a history too heavy and too hard to wear on the surface, carrying it the only way it could be carried, quietly, steadily, with both hands free, because the work was not done yet, and the work was never done yet, and that was, in the end, what it truly meant to be human. 3 months after our cohort dispersed 2 active assignments, I received a restricted data package through official channels. It contained a single document, a longitudinal psychological study conducted by the Academy's Behavioral Science Division across 19 cohorts over 40 years. The study had been tracking one variable. It had been asking, across 4 decades of screening room sessions, which cadets, after witnessing the footage, demonstrated the fastest recovery of functional decision-making in the subsequent 6 weeks. The answer, consistent across every cohort, every species composition, every variation in the footage itself, was not the cadets who appeared unaffected during the screening. It was not the cadets who had the best emotional regulation scores on entry. It was the cadets who had been most visibly affected during the screening who had shaken, or frozen, or pressed their hands flat against their legs to stop the trembling, and who had then, in the days and weeks following, chosen to stay. The study's conclusion was careful and precise. It noted that the functional calm observed in cadets with prior exposure to conflict documentation, specifically human cadets, who showed statistically 0 breakdown during screening, was not correlated with superior performance under real emergency conditions. It was correlated with average performance. The cadets who performed above average under genuine uncontrolled emergencies were the ones who had been frightened by the footage, because being frightened by it meant they had not already catalogued it. It meant the horror was still new. It meant they still had, somewhere inside them, an intact understanding of exactly what they were trying to prevent. The study had a final note, appended by its lead researcher, that had not been included in the curriculum review materials or the Academy's public summary. It said, "The human subjects in our sample demonstrate a capacity to carry prior exposure to documented trauma without visible distress. This is a genuine and unusual capability. However, long-term behavioral analysis suggests this capacity requires active maintenance." Human cadets who were not given structured opportunities to process prior exposure, who were simply assumed to be unaffected and therefore not offered support, showed significantly elevated incidence of delayed functional breakdown, typically appearing 18 to 24 months after initial training. The calm is real. The cost is also real. We have been misreading one for the absence of the other. I sat with that document for a long time. Then I opened a channel and sent a message to James Oro wherever his assignment had taken him. It said, "I have been doing this wrong. I was studying you when I should have been asking how you were." His reply came back 6 hours later, crossing whatever distance now separated us. It said, "Yeah, most people get there eventually, some of them don't. I'm glad you did." And then, after a pause long enough that I had almost put my screen away, "I'm okay, by the way, but thanks for asking. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that calm is not the same as empty, and that the heaviest things are often carried by the quietest hands, subscribe. There are more human stories from the stars, and in every one of them, someone already memorized the way out."